Afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted country. Well, today is January 24th day of the year. 341 days remain to the year's over with. Holidays observances. It is Global Belly Laugh Day. National Peanut Butter Day. National Beer Can Appreciation Day. Macintosh Computer Day. Thorablot, which is a special celebration in Iceland. Brings people together in the dark winter months. It's an event where families and friends gather to enjoy traditional Icelandic food and embrace their cultural heritage while freezing their rotunda off. National Compliment Day. International Day of Education. National Just Do It Day. Paul Pitcher Day. National Talk Like a Grizzled Prospector Day. Serva Mummers Festival. It's a event held in the small town of Pernik in Bulgaria. It's an annual celebration known for its dramatic parades featuring people dressed in elaborate and sometimes intimidating costumes. The participants, who are known as mummers, wear masks depicting various mythical creatures and wear costumes adorned with bells and animal skins. It's, by all accounts, quite a memorable event. Energy Saving Week. Farmhouse Breakfast Week. Cancer Talk Week. No Name Calling Week. National Fresh Squeezed Juice Week. Big Garden Bird Watch. Get a pair of binoculars and go sit in the bushes. Who knows what you'll see. World Kiwanis Week. Hunt for Happiness Week. Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. Snow Sculpting Week. Famous people born on this date. Sharon Tate, one of the victims of the Manson family. And John Belushi, who used to be a real hoot on Saturday Night Live. January, Dry January, Manuary, where you get to embrace your inner lumberjack. National Blood Donor Month. I got an email. I didn't say enough about John Belushi. He died at 33. Drugs, don't you know? He played on the Blues Brothers and Animal House, in addition to Saturday Night Live. Veganary, Thyroid Awareness Month, National Birth Defects Awareness Month, Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, National Slow Cooking Month, Bread Machine Baking Month, National Clean Up Your Computer Month, International Brain Teaser Month, National Be On Purpose Month, National Clean Up Your IRS Act Month, National Skating Month, National Soup Month, Fresh Florida Tomato Month, National CBD Month, Apple and Apricot Month, National Hobby Month, National Oatmeal Month, National Bass Safety Month, Clap for Health Month, National Poverty in America Awareness Month, National Black Diamond Month, Get a Balanced Life Month, Get Organized Month, International Creativity Month, Celebration of Life Month, National Be Kind to Food Servers Month, make sure you tip, National Hot Tea Month, the 41 AD, Claudius is proclaimed Roman Emperor by the Praetorian Guard after they assassinate the previous emperor and his nephew, Caligula. also known as Little Boots. 914 started the first Fatimite invasion of Egypt. 1438, the Council of Basel suspends Pope Eugene IV. Not even the spokesman of God is immune to being taken to task. 1458, Matthias Corvinus is elected King of Hungary. 1536, King Henry VIII of England suffers an accident while jousting, led to a brain injury that historians may have influenced his later erratic behavior and possible impotence. 1651, Arauco War. Spanish and Mapuche authorities meet in the Parliament of Baroa, renewing a fragile peace established at the Parliaments of Quillen in 1641 and 1647. 1679, King Charles II of England dissolves the Cavalier Parliament. 1742, Charles VII Albert becomes Holy Roman Emperor. For those that are not familiar with that title, originally and officially it was the Emperor of the Romans, and also known as the Roman German Emperor since the early modern period. Was the ruler and head of state of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, that title was generally held in conjunction with the title of King of Italy from the 8th to the 16th century, and almost without interruption with the title of King of Germany throughout the 12th and 18th century. The Roman Emperor title provided the highest prestige among medieval Catholic monarchs because the empire was considered by the Catholic Church to be the only successor of the Roman Empire during the Middle Ages and early modern period. So in theory and in diplomacy, the emperors were considered primus inter pares, first among equals, among other Catholic monarchs across Europe. From an autocracy in Carolingian times, the title by the 13th century evolved into an elective monarchy, with the emperor chosen by the prince-electors. Various royal houses of Europe at the time became de facto hereditary holders of the title, notably the Ottonians and the Sicilians. Following the late medieval crisis of government, the Habsburgs kept possession of the title with only one interruption from 1440 to 1806. Final emperors were from the House of Habsburg-Lorraine from 1765 to 1806. The Holy Roman Empire was dissolved by Francis II after his devastating defeat by Napoleon at the Battle of Austerlitz. And frankly, by that time, it didn't mean much insofar as rulership went. 1758. During the 7 Years' War, the leading burghers of Königsberg submit to Elizabeth of Russia, thus forming the Russian Prussia until 1763. 1817, crossing into the Indies, many soldiers of Juan Gregorio de la Harris are captured during the action of Picoeta. 1835, slaves in Salvador de Bahia, Brazil, stage a revolt, which is instrumental in ending slavery there 50 years later. 1848, California gold rush. James Marshall finds gold at Sutter's Mill near Sacramento. 1857, University of Calcutta is formally founded as the first fully fledged university in South Asia. 1859, the United Principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia, later named Romania, is formed as a personal union under the rule of Dominator Alexandru Ion Cuza. 1900, Second Boer War. The Boers stop a British attempt to break the siege of Ladysmith in the Battle of Spion-Kop. On this day in 1908, the first Boy Scout troop was organized in England by Robert Baden-Powell. 1915, World War I. British Grand Fleet battle cruisers under Vice Admiral Sir David Beatty engaged Rear Admiral Franz von Hipper's battle cruisers in the Battle of Dogger Bank. British had intercepted decoded German wireless transmissions and had advanced knowledge that a German raiding squadron was heading for the Dogger Bank. So ships of the Grand Fleet sailed to intercept the raiders. The British surprised a smaller and slower German squadron that fled for home. During a stern chase lasting several hours, British caught up with the Germans and engaged them in a long-range gunfire. They disabled the Blucher, the rearmost German ship, and Germans put the British flagship HMS Lion out of action. And due to inadequate signaling, the remaining British ships stopped the pursuit to sink Blucher. By the time the ship had been sunk, the rest of the German squadron had escaped. Alrighty. 1916, in Brashaba versus Union Pacific Railroad Company, Supreme Court of the U.S. declares the federal income tax is constitutional, even though it was a temporary tax put in to fund World War I. 1918, the Gregorian calendar is introduced in Russia by decree of the Council of People's Commissars, effective February 14th, 1918. 1933, the 20th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is ratified, changing the beginning and end of terms for all elected federal officials. 1935, Gottfried Kruger Brewing Company starts selling the first canned beer. 1939, the deadliest earthquake in Chilean history strikes Chilean, killing about 28,000 people. 1942, World War II, Allies bombarded Bangkok, leading Thailand, then under Japanese control, to declare war against the U.S. and the United Kingdom. 1943, World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill concluded a conference in Casablanca. 1946, United Nations General Assembly passes its first resolution to establish the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission. 1960, Algerian War. Some units of European volunteers in Algiers staged an insurrection known as the Barricades Week, during which they seized government buildings and fight with local police. 1961, Goldsboro B-52 crash. Bomber carrying 2 H-bombs breaks up in midair over North Carolina. The uranium core of one weapon still remains lost to this day. 1966, Air India Flight 101 crashes into Mont Blanc. That's where they make all those pins, don't you know? 1968, Vietnam War. The first Australian task force launches Operation Coburg against the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong during wider fighting around Long Binh and Bien Hoa. 1972, Japanese Sergeant Soichi Yokoi is found hiding in a Guam jungle where he'd been hiding since the end of World War II. He didn't know the war was over. 1977, the Atocha massacre occurs in Madrid during the Spanish transition to democracy. 1978, Soviet satellite Cosmos 954, with a nuclear reactor on board, burns up in Earth's atmosphere, scattering radioactive debris over Canada's Northwest Territories. Only 1% of the debris is recovered. 1984, Apple Computer places the Macintosh personal computer on sale in the U.S. On this day in 1986, Voyager 2 space probe makes the closest approach to Uranus. 1987, about 20,000 protesters marched in a civil rights demonstration in Forsyth County, Georgia. It's known as the 87 Forsyth County Protest. It's a series of civil rights demonstrations held in Forsyth County, Georgia. It consisted of 2 marches held a week apart, January 17th and January 24th, 1987. The marches and accompanying counter-demonstrations by white supremacists drew national attention to the county. Second march was attended by many prominent civil rights activists and politicians, including both of Georgia's U.S. senators, and attracted about 20,000 marchers, making it one of the largest civil rights demonstrations in U.S. history. Now, frankly, from my experience, Georgia is very bad about recognizing civil rights. When I stood up to a judge named John H. Land, and I said blacks had the right to legal representation like anybody else, He said, I was a traitor to my race, and I wouldn't need it in practice. 1989, notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, with over 30 known victims, is executed in the electric chair at the Florida State Prison. 1990, Japan launches Haiten, the country's first lunar probe, first robotic lunar probe since the Soviet Union's Lunar 24 in 1976, and the first lunar probe launched by a country other than the Soviet Union or the U.S. 2003, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security officially begins operation. 2009, Cyclone Klaus makes landfall near Bordeaux, France, causing 26 deaths as well as extensive disruptions to public transport and power supplies. 2011, at least 35 were killed and 180 injured in a bombing in Moscow's Domodedovo airport. And in 2018, former Dr. Larry Nassar sentenced to 175 years in prison after being found guilty of using his position to sexually abuse female gymnasts. That is certainly frowned on this day and time. Well, Newsom is all ready for a tarmac showdown with Trump. He didn't get invited to come greet the president, so he's just showing up. Trump's going to look at the devastation in California caused by the fires. President Trump has arrived in California to survey the wildfires now. Newsom says he'll be on the tarmac to greet and brief the president as he arrives in Los Angeles. Over 10,000 acres have already been burned by the Hughes fire. That's the most recent one. Since the fires that have killed nearly 30 people and forced tens of thousands to flee their homes broke out earlier this month, Trump has repeatedly criticized Newsom's handling of the crisis. He accused the governor of mismanaging both forestry and water policy, pointing to an intense backlash over perceived lack of preparation. He's called on Newsom to step down. You know, ATF has been accused of circumventing President Trump's order to place DEI staff on paid leave. They've been accused of allegedly quietly changing the job title of its former diversity officer in order to avoid President Trump's order. The number of representatives are saying it's time to abolish the ATF. President Trump has terminated Dr. Fauci's taxpayer-funded security detail. I'm not even sure why he had it in the first place. The pro-life activist prosecuted by Biden's DOJ. She's a grandmother. She's been pardoned by President Trump. She's 76 years old. President Trump has ordered the release of assassination files on President Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and I think Robert Kennedy was the third one. JFK's grandson is slapping back. He calls it a political ploy. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has issued a warning to state lawmakers about illegal immigration crackdown. President Trump's ordered deportation has gotten underway. Well, there's been a March for Life rally in Washington. No pink pussy hats seen so far. The DOJ has rescinded job offers to top law school graduates. There's a hiring freeze going on. Target has scaled back its DEI initiative. The former Obama advisors are telling The View that Democrats hurt the party by taking too long to admit that Biden couldn't win. They were the host of the Pod Save America, and they said Biden's own polling showed Donald Trump was going to win at least 400 electoral votes. Now, let's see. Some Walmart managers are getting pay raises. Some will be making over $600,000. Prince Andrew is having to tighten his financial belt, so to speak. He's trying to save money after King Charles secretly paid his rent, according to reports. His royal lodge is in a shocking state of disrepair. LA fires have forced Tiger Woods to move the Genesis Invitational Golf Tournament to San Diego because the LA golf course is caught on fire. Ilhan Omar, the member of the squad, has berated all those Democrats who attended Trump's inauguration. They weren't being loyal to the party. Well, let's see. LA Times owners having quite a struggle to reform the left-leaning newsroom. They don't seem to understand they're supposed to report the news, not try to make it. New York Times columnist said conservatives are winning the culture war after years of liberal domination. Those who had their sentences from January 6th commuted either through pardon or some other fashion are barred from the Capitol building by order of a federal judge. We'll see how long that federal judge lasts. I think he was appointed by, and a federal judge has also stayed President Trump's order doing away with anchor baby automatic citizenship. We'll see how long that lasts. All right, we've been talking about the strange and the unusual related to World War II. We talked about haunted aircraft carriers, haunted airplanes, haunted bases. You know, believe it or not, a lot of folks have reported seeing strange and unusual things. You know, there was a bit of a rivalry during the war between crews of aircraft carriers and the crews of battleships. I mean, the battleships, of course, were the undisputed stars of the naval arsenal for decades, if not for centuries. Battleship lineage goes back to ships that aligned sailing ships that packed a dozen plus guns below deck. Ironclad ships appeared during the Civil War and became more powerful, more deadly. But then the upstart aircraft carrier threatened the battleship supremacy. Well, we're going to talk about some the new type of rivalry that exists between these two types of ships. The paranormal rivalry. You know, while the aircraft carriers earned their share of press and glory, the battleship served as a workhorse of World War II. From the beginning to the very end of the conflict, the German battleship, the Schleswig-Holstein, probably fired the first shots of World War II when its crew unleashed a bombardment on Polish troops stationed in Westerplatte. Japanese surrendered officially on board the battleship USS Missouri. Well, the battleships were the warriors in hundreds of engagements at sea during the war. targets of hundreds of attacks and the scene of an incalculable number of acts of courage and valor. One ship that has earned a reputation on both the haunted and the hallowed fronts was the USS North Carolina, also called the Showboat. It was involved in just about every major naval engagement in the Pacific during World War II. And apparitions of sailors lost during battles have appeared to several witnesses who served on the ship during the war and after the conflict. Other witnesses say they've observed and experienced a range of paranormal phenomena that convince them that the ship is in fact haunted. In fact, the hauntings and the hints of hauntings have become so numerous that paranormal investigators, that includes some of the biggest names in the field, have joined in the hunt for proof of ghosts on board the North Carolina. One group that has conducted the most thorough investigation of these haunted going-ons on board the USS North Carolina and documented those adventures is the Port City Paranormal. Don't you love those fancy names? They probed the big boat back in 2009 and came back with an honest assessment that included some debunking. But at the same time, they also collected evidence that backs up many of the witnesses who claimed to experience haunted activity on board the ship. This paranormal research group was established in 2004. With education and training from the Ryan Research Center, the team has taken part in a in-depth chronicling the spirit activity on board the USS North Carolina, gathering information and evidence as well as theorizing why ghosts are actually haunting the ship. According to one member of the group, there's much more to investigating than stalking spirits in the dark. Your main goal is to explore the human experience and life after death. There is a belief that what you were in life is what you are in death. In other words, a personality survives dying. Well, according to one member, whose name is Jane, the most memorable encounter during the team's extensive study of the ship occurred as she walked down the completely dark passageway on the third deck. As she made her way down the hall, she noticed a small point of light. Had no idea what it could be. As it grew closer and closer until it stood right in front of her, and that's when she realized it wasn't really a light after all. She was staring right into a pair of blue eyes, and whatever it was gave her a wide smile. She said the smile was unmistakable. It was difficult to describe, but the hair seemed to just float around his head, and the hair had a reddish tinge to it. Other apparitions made themselves known, often in dramatic fashion. One night after everybody had gone home, Jane and her husband Doug found themselves alone on the ship, and they continued to explore, going deeper into the ship and eventually pausing on engine room number 3. That's when Jane had a strange feeling. She said, "I felt as if somebody was standing next to my right shoulder." So she was afraid to look, so she asked her husband to, and he turned and saw a tall blonde man standing right beside Jane, right where she felt the presence. As her husband and the spirit made eye contact, the ghost smiled at him and began to fade away. Well, Jane had spent a considerable amount of time in the archives as a volunteer, but Doug had never visited the archives, wasn't familiar with the pictures of the sailors that served and died on the ship. So Jane decided to test her husband's ghost sighting. Copied photos of a random group of 5 men, various men who served on board the North Carolina, including a man who was killed during the Japanese attack. She put them on their dining room table and asked her husband to look at each picture and pick the one that looked like the apparition he had seen. Well, her husband didn't hesitate. He immediately pointed to one picture. And Jane said she knew right away this was a photo of one of the sailors killed during the torpedo attack on the North Carolina. And over the years, this couple and their colleagues on the team amassed more evidence, including videos and DVDs. Electronic voice phenomena, don't you know? Most of which is documented and archived in the group's website. Also volunteered to help with the restoration. And Jane went on to become a docent, a volunteer guide. Also spent considerable time researching the daily lives of the men who served and fought on board that ship. And that research gave her additional insights into some of the paranormal activity that they and dozens of other witnesses had encountered on the ship. Most paranormal theorists will point to the USS North Carolina's dead as the prime suspects behind the haunting. And maybe these ghosts do linger, suggested Jane. But spirits of those killed during their service on the ship might not explain all the activity. In fact, some of the paranormal activity might be related to the emotional energy left behind by the ship's warriors. The main energy that fuels the activity is that of the many young men who served on board in North Carolina. Boys on board the battleship were energetic and devoted to the fight for their country and our freedom. And to many of the young men that fought there, this may have been the most exciting time of their lives. Well, there are a lot of things not to like about being a night security officer on board the North Carolina. First, it's dark and it's lonely, and it can be kind of creepy. But for somebody who doesn't mind the paranormal, even invites it into their lives, this could actually be the best job ever. A young man named Danny Bradshaw was ambivalent about whether or not he liked paranormal, but he seemed plenty of it on board the USS North Carolina. He worked there as a night watchman, and it's not like he wasn't warned what he would encounter. Even before he got the job, Bradshaw wrote the book Ghost on the Battleship North Carolina, received warnings. He said the man that held the position before him, who was a friend of his, told him that he should expect to see things on that ship that might test his assumptions about the world around us and the unseen world that lies beneath or above us. And Bradshaw still remembers his first encounter with that unseen world. He said it was pitch black at night. Of course, he was a night watchman, so you'd expect it to be pitch black. It was always dark on board the ship, but there was something else going on. He just had a weird feeling. And it could have been a feeling, or it could have been a premonition. Strange sensation grew as he walked toward the power box in the ship's galley, a single beam of light coming from his flashlight and crisscrossing the pathway in front of him. And adding to the creepy effect, the section that he walked through was filled with faceless cardboard silhouettes of sailors who gave visitors a better visual idea of how the men lived on board the North Carolina when she was in action. The cutouts may have been helpful to the visitors, but at night when you're all alone, they do look pretty freaky. In the event, he finally reached the power box at that instant, but as soon as it did, a sudden cold breeze hit him and a hand gripped him firmly by the shoulder. Footsteps echoed across the room, and he swung his flashlight around toward the sound and caught just for an instant the figure of a sailor just standing in an open hatch. It definitely was not one of the cardboard cutouts. In fact, the beam's flashlight went right through the sailor like it was transparent. Bradshaw said the spirit appeared so alive he could make out features, such as his blonde, almost white hair. And the sight so scared Bradshaw he let out a scream. And at that point, the spirit of the sailor vanished, and Bradshaw began shaking. He turned to run out of the room, but he soon learned that all he could run, he couldn't hide from the supernatural forces that work on that ship. Well, he descended a ladder to escape the clutches of the spirit sailor, but then he stopped long enough to hear footsteps coming down the ladder above him. So there was no way he could go back up, so he continued down the ladder and ran toward the other side of the ship for his alternate escape route, playing to himself, please God, no, I don't want to die here. The prayer apparently worked because Bradshaw was able to run to safety. And like many witnesses of the ship's paranormal power, he wonders what's behind the haunting. Now, certainly the battleship has been the scene of plenty of violent incidents and even deaths. Historians say that 10 people died on board the ship, a few from direct action during World War II, a few from mishaps and friendly fire. So for paranormal researchers, this was a no-brainer. Places where dramatic scenes of violence and death have played out tend to be places where you'll find ghosts and other paranormal activity. And this may explain some of the ghosts on board the North Carolina, according to Bradshaw. Over the years of paranormal run-ins, or in some cases paranormal run-outs, Bradshaw developed some of his own theories about the ghosts that haunt the ship. He said, in fact, he says there are spirits, plural, that haunt the North Carolina. There are good spirits, and at least one not so good, if not evil, spirit behind the activity. Well, the good ones apparently just engage in what you might refer to as aggravating activities, such as a way to reach out to Bradshaw and let him know they're around. They turn off lights and slam doors, along with moving items in the room around. But he also knows when that evil spirit's present. He says the temperature drops so much you can see his own breath, even in the summer. In the bowels of the superhuman ship, he says this ghost screams at him, and he's felt so threatened by the entity, he's run from it. And of course, when he runs, the ghost chases him. These encounters with the evil entity can last several minutes. He once told Allison Parker, a reporter from News and Record, 2 things bother me. He can physically move things, and there's evil in him. I don't know if he's saving something up for me. It makes me wonder if there's going to be a night he's going to do something really bad. Well, you wouldn't be the first to suggest that maybe all of these apparitions and phantom arguments are just part of Bradshaw's overactive imagination, but there's one unsettling fact. Bradshaw's friends have seen them too, and so have visitors to the ship. And these ghosts don't just hide around and wait for night. They appear in broad daylight, sometimes as public tours or going through the ship. Another group, the Bedford Paranormal, may have uncovered some evidence of a haunting source as well. Some of the supernatural manifestations may relate to the torpedo attack on the ship during World War II. According to historians, 4 men died when a Japanese torpedo found its mark near the area where the ship's latrine is located. 4 men were in the latrine when the explosion and the ensuing rush of water ripped into that space. Emergency protocol insisted that doors to the area have to be shut when the water comes in so it doesn't flood the undamaged areas. So the sailors quickly sealed off the latrine area, and that area remained sealed even though they could hear the screams of men who survived the attack. But they were stuck in the latrine as it rapidly filled with water. The man in question banged on the door, but the sailors did their duty. They knew more water would take more lives, maybe jeopardizing the entire ship. So they made the decision not to let him out. And this had a deep effect on the rest of the sailors. When the team from Bedford Paranormal explored the ship during a tour led by Bradshaw, one member of the group noticed some odd behavior from a nearby berth. The light would dim and then regain its full glow. The phenomenon, like somebody walked in front of the light in that room, happened over and over again. Another member of the tour saw the light show as well and went to investigate. Once he entered the room, the light steadied, and as soon as the investigator returned to the group, the light began to flicker again. Well, one theory is that the spirit of the sailor who had been trapped in the ship during the attack is still in the room, and he's hiding from the living human presence. He also gathered some evidence the hard way that confirmed Bradshaw's suspicion that either at best a spirit with a prankster sense of humor, or at worst a malicious entity remained on the battleship. First, their spirit-sensing equipment was tripped. Better description is the device went berserk. And a few members claimed something harassed them during their investigation. In particular, blonde females with the group reported that something tugged at their hair. At least one of the investigators went beyond being convinced the USS North Carolina was haunted. She won't even return to the ship. Interesting to note that other female investigators report they've also received this unwanted attention. One researcher by the name of Jane Anderson, for example, said she may have been the recipient of a ghost goose at one point during the investigation. If you think sailors are bad when they hit port after being at sea for a few months, imagine what they're like when they're locked up on a ship for eternity. Beyond the anecdotal evidence, the team said they listened to one clip and it sounded like big guns booming. Noise resembled the news footage of the showboat in action during World War II. Well, this particular group, along with dozens of other paranormal investigators and hundreds of employees and visitors, believe the battleship is haunted. Time, they say, just can't silence the indomitable spirit of the USS North Carolina or her crew. And from the USS North Carolina, let's go to the USS Arizona at the USS Arizona Memorial. Well, you have to remember it was a cold, calculated event that brought the reluctant country of America into World War II. Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor meant to stun the country quickly into submission, did the opposite. It incurred the wrath of a nation that was previously safe and content to remain in the relative isolation their two oceans offered. December 7th, 1941, which has been described as a date that lives in infamy, also lives on in unexpected and unexplained ways. According to paranormal theorists and hundreds of witnesses, people believe Pearl Harbor is now haunted by spirits whipped up by the same flames of passion and patriotism, fear, and anger that ignited the country 80 years ago, give or take. Although most of the sailors, airmen, Marines, and soldiers who served at Pearl or on the day it was attacked are now gone, more than their memories alive today at the Hawaiian base. Some say the psychological intensity of the battle may have etched itself into spirits and souls of those who lost their lives in the attack. And they return even after all these years. Comes as no surprise to the experts of the paranormal that USS Arizona Memorial, that center of remembrance at Pearl Harbor, is also a hub for supernatural phenomena at the base. Memorial is built over the top of the wreckage of the battleship, which took the brunt of the horrendous Japanese bombing run on the base. Type of emotional intensity and that level of tragedy tends to naturally attract anomalous activity, paranormal theorists suggest. These experts and believers in the paranormal have no trouble believing that ghosts walk still on the Arizona. It's more than a memorial. Actually, it's the tomb for more than 1,000 sailors and officers who served on the battleship, which was considered one of the jewels of the Pacific Fleet. And it was on an early December morning when a flurry of bombs hit the ship. And one of the bombs crashed into ammunition magazines, detonating a catastrophic explosion. Well, as a tourist attraction, the memorial is the subject of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of pictures. In addition to the photographic quality of the photogenic quality of the Hawaiian base, visitors just want to take home a long-term memento of their journey to the site. But some tourists claim they get more than that. They believe they have evidence of an eternal reminder. Some of the shots, weird shapes and oddly lit orbs of light are visible. Ones the photographer swears weren't in the frame when they snapped the picture. And over the years, people visiting the Arizona have taken photos that show orbs and oddly shaped shadows and what even appear to be the images of people. The images are often foggy and or appear as human-shaped mist, according to some reports. EVPs popping up on digital cameras and smartphone screens are one thing, but actually seeing a ghost is something else. One of the stories told most often is the story about a sailor tasked with morning watch right before the attack. According to the story, the man briefly left his post on the deck of the Arizona. Minutes later, Japanese planes zoomed in and dropped their lethal cargo. The sailor and hundreds of other men were killed instantly. Well, the figure of a sailor is said to appear near where the USS Arizona once docked, usually on misty mornings during low tide. He's seen on what's described as eternal watch now, looking out into the memorial. Some speculate he's perhaps driven by remorse or guilt for leaving his watch at the worst possible time. And it's not just electronic phenomena and listless apparitions that point toward a supernatural occupation of the naval base. Some say you can actually hear the ghost of the past. Alarm bells often blare out near the memorial. Often the alarms sound like they're ringing in an unknown spot in the distance. Other visitors have reported the sound is so clear and so loud and so persistent they believe the alarm bells are part of some ghostly reenactment. But of course, No alarm bells are part of the memorial. Another hotly debated piece of Pearl Harbor paranormal is where the ghostly images of the sailors who died in the attack can be seen in the waves that undulate throughout the base's pristine waters. No one has ever distributed a picture of the mournful, misty ghost who fell on his watch, but a photo taken of a water ghost has proved interesting and has made its way around the internet. According to one report on the website Mysterious Universe, an Australian tourist named Susan Devaney visiting Pearl Harbor September 26, 2011. As she and her family toured the bay, she, like hundreds of others, was taking pictures just about as fast as her fingers tapped a button on her digital camera. Well, at a certain point, she decided she had enough photos. In fact, she thought... Well, as I said, she thought she may have too many pictures. She's going to delete a few, as we all do. So, pausing in her tour, she sat down and checked through all the pictures, checking to see if there's anything she ought to keep or not. And some photos immediately were deleted. Lighting wasn't right, or the picture was blurry. And noticing some distortion in one photo, she put her finger on the delete button, and she noticed something peculiar about that photo. Something strange was in the water. And as she inspected a blurry section of the photo more closely, she saw the unmistakable image of a young man staring back at her. Without specifying what she saw, she enlisted a few other family members to examine that photo on their own. And she didn't point out the shape that she saw in the water, but her husband saw it instantly. It was a face. Well, this spotting of the face gave Devaney and her family a moment of pause, and they reflected on the great sacrifice that the young men made on that day in 1941. She said it looked really sad and young. Now, not all the skeptics are convinced of the photographic evidence. They say people are pattern seekers. We look at random elements, such as a cloud, and see objects or people. For example, we might see Mickey Mouse or a horse or the ghost of a long-dead hero. And some skeptics say the face in the oil-slick water is nothing more than that. Now, you can find that photo on the web and judge for yourself. You know, despite the photographic evidence and tons of other spooky stories about Pearl Harbor, it's important to note that also that some of the biggest skeptics include the Park Service that looks after the site. Their official position is there are no ghosts. Well, let's go to the USS The Sullivans. The mission of the old naval battle wagons of World War II isn't quite over yet. After years of staring down the barrel of the most impressively armed and best-trained navies that the U.S. ever faced, several of the ships in the Pacific have been reassigned to serve as classrooms and eternal monuments to the sailors who once worked and fought on those vessels. And that's probably why one couple decided to pay a visit to the museum ships that are open to the public in the Buffalo Naval Park. Wanted to take in some history up close and personal. They just had no idea how up close and personal it would be. Well, not long into their visit, they realized they made a mistake. It was off-season and exhibits were closed, but suddenly their luck turned in their favor. An officer was on board the Fletcher-class destroyer, the USS Sullivans. Now, that ship is a veteran of some of the Pacific's bloodiest battles and now rests in the relatively calm waters of Lake Erie. Well, this individual whose uniform made it clear he was an admiral. Not only did he let the couple aboard the ship, he gave him a personal tour. However, there was something odd about this highly decorated guide. He appeared a little distant at times, and some of the stories he told contained highly detailed information, and actually they were a little graphic, like the one he told in the fire room about a sailor who was burned in an accident there. Of course, after the tour was over, they couldn't help but brag about it. But when they bragged about the tour, they found some disconcerting information from people who questioned their account. They found out, for instance, there was no admiral at the park. Wasn't now, never had been. And not only that, but the guys don't dress up in uniforms, and certainly not the uniform of an admiral. Well, they finally realized they may have just been the latest victim of the USS The Sullivans haunting. Now, the haunting of the USS The Sullivans allegedly began on another ship decades ago and thousands of miles away in the war-torn Pacific Ocean. 5 brothers from Iowa, the Sullivan boys. Albert, who was 20, Madison, 23, Joseph, 24, Francis, 26, and George, 27, were all serving aboard the USS Juneau in 1942. And they had agreed to join the Navy as long as they could serve together. Nothing would separate this close-knit family. November 13th, 1942, as the destroyer took part in the Battle of the Guadalcanal campaign, a lurking Japanese submarine sent a torpedo crashing in the thin armor of the Juneau, and it tested the brotherly bond. That torpedo, according to reports, landed close to the ammunition magazine. Huge explosion ripped the ship apart, and the Juneau, or actually what was left of it, sank. Well, the captain of a nearby ship, which could have rescued survivors, didn't take a chance on the rescue operation. He doubted anybody survived the fire and worried that the sub might target the rest of the task force. So a call to send a rescue craft to the scene was not transferred till much later because the rule required radio silence. Unbelievably, about 100 of the 700 crew survived the explosion and found themselves stranded in the ocean. Reportedly, 2 of the Sullivan brothers, Al and George, were among the survivors. Al, unfortunately, drowned shortly after the sinking. And according to a small group of survivors, the grief caused by the loss of his brothers drove George to such despair he jumped off the relative safety of a life raft in a desperate attempt to find and rescue his brothers. January 12th, 1943, back in Iowa, Thomas, the father of the Sullivan boys, was about to leave for work when 3 men in uniform, a doctor, a lieutenant commander, and a petty officer, appeared on his porch. One of the officers spoke up. "I got some news for you about your boys." Thomas said, "Which one?" And the officer said, "I'm sorry, all 5. Well, the loss of all 5 sons at once did more than devastate the husband and father. It changed history. Officials changed military policy so that surviving family members could avoid serving in combat or being drafted if the family already had lost members in the war. In fact, the plot of the movie Saving Private Ryan revolves around this idea. In a magnanimous tribute to the American heroes, the Navy named a new destroyer bound for the Pacific after the brothers. Now, that tribute may not have just invoked the name of the fighting Sullivan family, but it may have invoked their spirits as well. As evidence, some of the crew members who served on board the USS The Sullivans point to the relatively luck the ship had during the war, avoiding any major damage or loss of life. Sailors point to the Sullivan boys as spirit-bound protectors of the ship. But paranormal theorists claim other stories prove the brothers are now in eternal service aboard their namesake. Since the dedication of the ship, sailors on board the USS The Sullivans have reported experiencing strange activity that they believe is tied to one, if not all, of the brothers. One of the first documented supernatural reports circulated soon after the ship was retired in 1969. According to one account, workers saw a heavy wrench levitate off a table and sail across a room. Well, today, this ship served as a living museum of what life was like on a World War II destroyer. As incidents that appear to defy rational explanations continue to occur, the floating museum in tribute to the Sullivans may also give staff and visitors a lesson about what the afterlife may look like. One longtime staff member reported he had more than a few personal lessons over the years. Eddie Kirkwood, staff member who worked a lot of night shifts on the USS The Sullivans, has reported several of these weird occurrences that for him defy rational explanation. His stories were reported in The Generation, a student newspaper for University of Buffalo. One night, Kirkwood was asked to paint a fresh set of yellow lines on the floor of the ship. He put the yellow paint on the table, prepared to work. Before he could, though, he watched as the paint can sailed off the table and smashed into the wall. And paint went everywhere. Then, as the paranormal fury reached a crescendo, a wielding shield began to swirl around a fire extinguisher. Kirkwood tried to desperately explain away the activity. Maybe the wind blew the shield, but it's doubtful a breeze could be generated in the deep center of the ship. And the door was shut, and all the fans and vacuums had been turned off as well. Worker did what a lot of us would do if they experienced something like this out of the ordinary. He went home. Actually, to be more truthful, he ran home. Whatever was trying to get Kirkwood's attention did so in a quick hurry. And it wouldn't be the last time the spirits of the USS The Sullivans would be in contact with the man. Kirkwood knew he wasn't the only worker with the unenviable job of watching over the haunted ship at night. And he'd heard plenty of stories about the ship and actually the park itself, because other sites in the area were also rumored to be haunted. But the ghost stories about the USS The Sullivans had generally made the rounds throughout the community. World War II history buffs had visited Buffalo Naval Park as well as groups of paranormal investigators. 1989, a worker traveled below deck and got the shock of his life. He saw the floating torso and head of a man coming toward him. The face was bloody and burnt. Wouldn't be the only worker pestered not by a bad boss or dreadful duties on the job, but by the ship's restless spirits. One man who worked as a night watchman before Kirkwood heard a voice yell out, "Hey, you!" The employees said the ghost on the USS The Sullivans, many presumed one or all the Sullivans, can get physical. One worker woke up on the hard deck of the ship, certainly not the place to sneak a nap during his shift. Had no idea how he got there and believed some mysterious and invisible force knocked him unconscious. Well, Kirkwood's next experience in the haunted naval yard rattled him a little more. USS Little Rock, which is another ship in the harbor, often plays host to parties and receptions. And he worked a party on that ship one night. As he mixed with the party attendees and began to thank him for putting on a little bit of extra show for him. He was confused, had no idea what they were talking about. But he played along, and then they pointed to a spinning radar dish. They all said it was a pretty cool party effect. Well, Kirkwood didn't consider this the naval version of a spinning disco ball entertainment at all. He knew he had turned off the circuit breaker that killed the power to the radar. No reason for it to be activated. Allowing the guests to believe he turned on the radar for their benefit, never let on that something was amiss, but he did file the incident away on a long list of very weird activities that he witnessed on this ship and on the USS The Sullivans. Well, there's other places in the haunted Buffalo Naval Park. And although staff members seem to have the most exposure to the ghost of the Sullivans, casual visitors have also amassed a miscellaneous list of strange experiences, including the feeling of a presence that follows them through their tour, hearing the sound of somebody whispering in their ears and watching hatches open and close by themselves. Well, there's more that I could tell you about the Sullivans, but we come to the end of the night's show, and in fact the week's show. We'll be back on Monday, and once again you'll be listening to Ken Hudnall, the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great weekend.